sing a little bit, Peter. What a wonderful world this would be, according, obviously, to NATO GCC. This is what they're trying, It's the same old story. The US, the Brits, and the French inside NATO. The Brits and the French are trying to convince the other NATO members that lethal weaponizing of the rebels is the way to go. The GCC, of course, those paragons of democracy, including the House of Saud, of course, which has been doing that for, in fact, over 2 years now, in the black market, via Croatia, you name it. And, of course, Israel. Israel just jumped in because the plan A, which was the lethal weaponizing of the rebels, was not working. There was this red line after red line. Everybody got lost in this Hollywood shuffle. At the same time, they noticed that the Syrian army was progressing instead of regressing in the Hama Homs corridor in Syria. So the so-called rebels, the Free Syrian Army gangs and Jabhat al-Nusra style jihadis were losing ground. And at the same time, Sheikh Nasrallah went to Iran. He had a get-together with Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. They are very tight, so an attack on each one of them is an attack on all of them. So what to do? Plan B. Call Israel, something that was already decided between Chuck Hagel and his tour of the Middle East recently, Israel and the petromonarchies. Israel does it. If there are Fateh 110 missiles struck by Israel, good for Israel. If they are not, they still deplete Syrian army arsenal, and we start all over again with Plan B. So I expect more attacks sooner rather than later. In fact, all of U.S. think tank land, left, right, middle, whatever, they know that Washington is selling itself the myth that the CIA is screening which weapons go to which groups. This is completely absurd. Obviously, these people have never been to Syria. They have never been to the Turkish-Syrian border, and they don't know the players. Saudi Arabia and Qatar, their agenda is not Washington's agenda. It's completely different. Qatar, they want some kind of Muslim Brotherhood-led government in Syria. And the House of Saud, they want a Wahhabi emirate, which is going to breed lots of Al-Qaeda-style types later on. Their agenda is completely different, and they are arming themselves. Sometimes it goes through Turkey. Sometimes it's screened by the CIA in southern Turkey. But we don't know who gets these weapons at the last resort. And most of these people are getting the weapons indirectly are Jabhat al-Nusra, because they have very good connections, for instance, with the tribal sheikhs in Al-Anbar province in Iraq. A lot of commanders that affiliated with Jabhat al-Nusra, they're not Syrians, they're Iraqis. They were fighting the Americans in Anbar province 2004, 2005, 2006. I met some of these people at the time over there, and now they're in Syria. They are doing the back and forth across the border.
Iraq has a lot to do with it. Their civil war, and let's call it what it is, it's a civil war, is spilling into Syria. Everyone's trying to get their piece of bread, get the big piece of bread here. And Pepe's right. The CIA, it's the same old song and dance. They've been doing it for 40 years. They did it with the Taliban. You saw what happened there. And it's, there's no excuse for it, really. And yeah, they are selling. There's a couple things that they're selling. One thing that they're selling that they tried to sell late last year was that the FSA was this united, Western-style military, and that's anything but the case. Yeah. They're totally fractious, and they're fighting amongst each other. They're fighting Jabhat al-Nusra, and everyone's vying for power right now. So, there's really only two good options here I see. One would be that we're able to keep Assad in power, and he's able to come to an agreement with the rebels in which they all get a piece of the pie, something kind of like how Lebanon's government is. And the other one is if the FSA can unite, and I just don't see that happening. And the more that we arm these guys, the worse off it's going to be. I mean, Libya is still a mess, and you saw that spilled south into Africa. It's just a giant mess, and giving them weapons isn't going to solve anything. So
trying to do that, and the Americans have been saying no. Because Obama, one of the first Obama lines is Assad had to go. Yeah. And now the Obama administration is saying, look, after 2 years, he's not going. He still has support in Damascus, the business classes in Damascus and Aleppo. There are no major defections in the Syrian army. I have to say that every day because people in America, they are not listening. one or two generals that defect after a few months. These are not major defections. They still control the army. They are fully weaponized. So it's not going to happen. The only possible solution, I agree, from the beginning, Russia was proposing that. Let's sit down at the same table, all the players, including all the regional players, and that includes Iran as well at the table. And the Americans have been saying no.
In a situation like this, it's
you can't just look beyond
don't talk
Assad. You have to do something to get beyond Assad.
Chris, jump in. Go ahead.
What exactly are we going to do? I mean, we're talking about beyond Assad as if it's already been written. Okay. How exactly do we do that? Because I'll tell you what, he's shown recently that his military is quite capable of pushing the rebels back.
Okay, Chris.
So what do we do? Airstrikes?
Let's go to Chris first. Gentlemen, let's go to Chris.
Insurgencies like this.
Chris, go ahead.
Insurgencies like this, last for decades. There's no way that Assad could potentially hold on to power for a number of years, if the international community continues not to take any kind of action. But in the end, he's going to go. And the question is, what's going to happen then? I agree with you about that. And the reality is that we need to do everything we can to protect all sides, including the Alawites in Syria, from some kind of a major slaughter. And that's going to require a lot more international cooperation, including between Russia, the United States, and NATO, and our partners in the region than we're getting right now.
Pepe, go ahead.
Now, not only the Alawites, Christians and Kurds as well. The Kurds, they are in northeast Syria. They already have a measure of independence. So in practical terms, it's autonomy. They would love that to continue, in fact. The Christians know that if there is a Wahhabi-style Sunni hardcore post-Assad government, they are doomed. And so are the Alawites as well. So if you have everybody at the same table, include, of course, with Russia, Iran, and the Saudis, and all the GCC petromonarchies, plus the Westerners, then at least some sort of adult conversation can ensue. They're not even talking at the moment.
All right, Jeff.
To answer your question, depends on what's going to happen in the Iranian presidential elections next month. All the candidates so far, they are very, very close to Khamenei. So this is not going to change. This means they are very, very close with the Revolutionary Guards as well. Syria is a red line for Tehran, and Hezbollah support is a red line for Tehran. How they're going to respond to what's going on at the moment, we're going to see maybe in 2 or 3 months after we have a new government in place, where we'll have a president answering directly to Khamenei policy and not clashing with him like Ahmadinejad and his cabinet. But the thing is, in terms of missiles, even if we don't know from any source whether Hezbollah bought these Fateh 110s from Iran. Even if they didn't, they have a similar missile, the M600, Syrian technology. It's almost as good as the Fateh 110s. So the case of if they were attacking Israel in the near future, they would use the M600s. They don't need the Fateh 110s. Of course, everybody is on the ground. Not only Iran and Syria and Hezbollah, but the GCC petromonarchies, especially the Emirates, Qatar, and the House of Saud, not to mention the logistical support of Syria. And yes, I agree with our other guest. It is already a regional conflict. It's going to get much worse, especially because the West, via US, Britain, and France, they see they are totally impotent to conduct anything on the ground. And now we have jihadis let loose inside Syria. We're going to have Hezbollah playing against Al-Qaeda, which is a neocon wet dream, of course. And we have the back and forth of jihadis between Iraq and Syria. La Del Ponte is not a suicidal operative. This is ridiculous. If she said that, it's because she has evidence. No wonder the UN start backtracking the day after. And no wonder the Americans were stalling this UN investigation from the beginning. Just talk to Sergei Lavrov. That's what I was going to tell you.
I think that partition is certainly one of the possible outcomes.
Go ahead.
This is what Israel and the neocons have been dreaming for over 10 years. Just look at the Saban report about regime change and, of course, later maybe partitioning of Syria. Look at what Seymour Hersh was saying already in 2007. Okay, divide and rule, a weak Syria divided into 3 warring feuds, just like Iraq is already partitioned in 3 states.
All right, gentlemen.
Well, Israel is facing the prospect of Syria-based militants attacking across its northern border with the backing of Assad's regime. A Palestinian armed group reportedly says it's been given the green light by Damascus to carry out raids from the Golan Heights, which is over here. It's apparently part of Syria's response to a series of Israeli airstrikes on the territory over the weekend. And Syrian missile batteries have also been pointed at Israel, ready to retaliate immediately in case of a new attack. In neighbouring Lebanon, combined Syrian-Lebanese units are reportedly on standby. Reaction from Eric Margolis' the Free Syrian Army, saying that they are ready to point their guns towards Israel.
Of course, we won't side with the regime, but we won't side with Israel either, which is a traditional enemy of our country. But I want to stress that if Israeli strikes are aimed at destroying Syria's infrastructure, we will stand with the regime. If Israel's target is the Syrian people, we will stand with the regime.
Is that the sort of response Israel was expecting from the Free Syrian Army, Eric?
Probably not, but I don't think they were expecting cheers either, because the so-called Free Syrian Army are very strong militants. They're certainly very anti-Israel. In fact, they're more anti-Israel than the Syrian government people are. But these groups are just lightly armed Rambos running around. They pose absolutely no military threat to Israel at all.
But one may have thought that those Israeli airstrikes would have helped the rebels.
Well, we have to see. Not yet. But do they mark the beginning of the mighty Israeli Air Force acting as the Air Force for the Syrian revolution? It's possible, and destroying President Assad's Air Force, which is playing a key role in keeping him in power, and his armor. If it does do this, if it launches more attacks, we can conclude that Israel is doing either at the behest of the United States in conjunction with whatever the case, it's become a major player in the war, and it will probably overthrow the Assad regime. If it can, it certainly has the capability.
So the message it's been putting across, of course, it was acting in self-defense because of that threat of Hezbollah receiving those weapons from Iran via Syria. You're saying that's actually more to Israel's agenda than self-defense?
Oh, much more. It's made a big deal about these missiles, and Israel has a legitimate concern about these missiles. It was showered with hundreds and hundreds of them back in the last war in 2006. But the point is, Israel is taking a very aggressive forward policy here, and this may mark either Israel's entry into the war in Syria or round 3 or 4 of Israel's attempt to crush the Hezbollah movement in Lebanon, because there's been a lot of open discussion about that. The war is certainly spilling over into Lebanon and into Iraq. It has everybody there. There are over 4 million internal and external refugees in Syria. Syria is turning into another Iraq. It's a terrible situation. I covered the Lebanese civil war that went on from 1975 to 2000, and I'm sorry, to 1990. And it was an absolutely nightmarish situation where the whole country broke up into little feuding cantons and militias and gangs, and nobody knew who was in charge of what. And this is happening in Syria.
All right, just briefly, I'm here in Moscow. John Kerry, US Secretary of State, he's just been here talking to Vladimir Putin. What do you make of the meeting tonight? They seem to be cooperative. They're now talking about that big meeting in a month's time, the Geneva meeting. Do you think that the two sides obviously are united over this now and could actually get all parties to start talking, and that's their aim? Do you think this has been a successful meeting in Moscow today?
Well, it's a good first step. You know, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov has been rightly urging a peace conference and a resolution of this war by negotiation for many, many months now, well over a year. However, there is very strong sentiment in the U.S. and the Republican Party wants to attack Syria, wants another military operation. And I don't know why they have to wait for a month for this peace conference. Syria is burning. The region is burning. They ought to get at it tomorrow.
Eric, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. Always good to talk to you. Eric Margolis joining us live there, war correspondent, columnist and author.
A previous Israeli war at the turn of 2009 killed at least 1,400 Gazans. Israeli forces continued to attack the people of Gaza on almost a daily basis, despite the Egyptian-mediated ceasefire, which ended the 8-day war. Now Gazans say they expect the worst as the world keeps turning a blind eye to Israeli aggressions.
Israel will wage another war on Gaza, and it may take place within days or weeks. Almost everyone you talk to in Gaza will tell you that they are worried about another war, especially with the continued Israeli threats.
Israel used similar warmongering rhetoric before its last 2 attacks on Gaza. Analysts say Israeli forces are issuing threats as scare tactics against Palestinians to stop them from resisting Israeli aggressions.
I think the Israeli army might keep continuing doing some small attacks, targeting some leaders in Hamas and Islamic Jihads, and targeting the Palestinian infrastructures. This comes at the old time as part of the Israeli psychological war, which is continuous on the people and the Palestinian military factions in the Gaza Strip to threat the people, to get them under pressure all the time.
The Zionist enemy is getting ready for a major military operation on Gaza. We expect an escalation in the coming days, but we are not sitting idle. Our military wing has been training for another war, and it will not be a cakewalk for the Zionists when they come to confront our fighters.
Although the last Israeli onslaughts have faded from the headlines, their destruction continues to bear witness to the horrors the people of Gaza have endured.